darlings, and welcome to episode 23 of Greenwood Talks. I've got an anonymous ask which says, Dear Lord Thranduil, I have a preoccupation with nuclear disaster. I constantly worry about it. I do recognize that there's not much potential of attack where I am from, a belligerent nation of terror. However, I live within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant and only a bit further from another few. And I've recently learned about how American nuclear stores are rather poorly managed. It's entirely possible that the disaster may happen where I live. How do I handle the anxiety about it? Well, darling, I think this is a bit of a difficult question for many reasons. It's true that there's not sort of a lot of reason for sort of nuclear terrorism. I know it's a big concern with the US, and certainly if they honored their own proliferation agreement, perhaps we wouldn't have quite so much worry about it. But for a country that's making the rest of the world sort of get rid of their nuclear weapons, you know, they haven't really done much themselves, but I'm not going to throw shade at the US for that, because of course they were only the ones that made all the other countries do it, so. Anyhow, you were talking about nuclear power plants. Now, it's true that there's sort of a lot of mismanagement and poor security involved sort of in all aspects of nuclear power. And also from a safety standard, you know, there's really terrible management of both nuclear waste once it's spent, and depleted uranium is a huge issue. It's used in a lot of American weaponry for the military, and it's irradiated, so when it lands, it sort of irradiates wherever it hits, which is just so wonderful for those countries that are not America, where it ends up. But I could go on and on about that topic forever, because, you know, environmental issues are one of the things that I hold very close to my heart, and although I do understand the lack of emissions of nuclear power, and I think that's absolutely splendid, the entire rest of the process of creating nuclear energy is incredibly terrible for the environment. So we're just going to put that on hold, because politics don't really mix in these sort of things, darling. So let's just get back to your concern. Now, how to deal with anxiety now. It's true that once you sort of start to learn about these things, it really can be sort of terror-inducing. So I understand fully where you're coming from. But do keep in mind that, particularly if you live on the east coast of the US, the chances of sort of the type of disasters that typically cause issues for nuclear power plants are relatively small. You know, there's although there is a fault line along that part of the US, it almost never has any activity, you know, so for that, you know, you don't have to worry about sort of what happened in Japan with the earthquake and the tsunami and all the rest of, well, we know what happened. So for that, at least, you don't have to worry so much about sort of the natural disaster aspect. It's true there's always sort of a potential for things to happen, but you could say that about almost anything, you know, and I'm not trying to sort of amp up your terror about other things. I'm just saying it is incredibly unlikely. So what I would do is, you know, darling, I haven't had quite enough wine for this. What I would say is that you should probably have some wine yourself, darling. Just start out with that. You know, I think there's a lot of things in the world today, if we really stop and sort of analyze them deeply, they can be incredibly frightening. And the only way I manage to sort of move past that is to concentrate on the things I can help with. You know, is it likely that I'll be able to shut down a nuclear power plant? To try to prevent that sort of thing from happening? No. However, I can do my part to sort of use less electricity. I know the US uses a very large, I think it's something like a fourth of the power in the US or something, or maybe it's only 20%, but that it's a huge amount of power that it does come from nuclear power plants, and so I try to reduce the amount of electricity that I use when I am in the States, and even other places as well. And, you know, the less power that's being used by that source, the less plutonium that they're going to require, and the less it's going to be used. So I think doing that is always useful. And then, of course, if you can invest in or sort of lobby for alternative power sources, the US has been very slow to sort of adapt to both solar and wind energy. And it's true that you do need a little bit of power to get those started, which is usually done by hydroelectric or coal or, unfortunately, nuclear power. But trying to sort of get yourself involved with alternative energy sources is going to be helpful for sort of reducing the reliance of Americans on nuclear power. And I think it would just be so good for the world if we all just sort of went away from nuclear power. And I know that if we just stopped today doing anything with nuclear power, we wouldn't have enough electricity for the world. But I think we need to start moving away from it. And I've heard a lot of sort of negative blowback about renewable energy sources because they do require some of the more traditional things to sort of get them going just a little bit. But isn't it better to just have a little bit of what's bad and a lot of what's good than to just sort of say, screw it, we're just going to stick with the bad thing? I just think that's sort of backwards thinking. And so I'd say just, try to do things that are going to reduce the amount of electricity that you use and that do sort of focus more on renewables. And that's going to make an impact if you can sort of spread the word around to your friends and family, and get the word out there. Then over time that is going to make a difference. I know I sound like a terrible PSA, darling, but I really do believe that, and you can laugh at me and send me hate all you want, but I do honestly believe that. And I know a lot of environmentalists sort of lean towards nuclear, but I just don't believe it, darling. I will give you so much evidence to the contrary, but let's move on because I'm just rambling on again. For the anxiety, I think it's mostly just sort of, it's the usual sort of thing, de-stressing exercises, sort of breathing and meditation are very useful, and focus on the positive things. I think if you can sort of put your energy into something else, you can often sort of deflect your anxiety into a more positive thing. Get yourself a hobby that's sort of all-consuming. I know, and this is the reason why I don't do so much of it, I sort of can get very easily addicted to the little app games, and there's, it just sort of becomes this whole thing, and then I play them so much that when I close my eyes I still see the thing going. And I'm not saying get that far gone, I'm not saying try to get an addictive sort of problem going, but I'm just saying try to focus your energy onto something so much that it sort of consumes that part of your mind that would otherwise be sort of concentrating on your anxieties. And that's easier for some people than others. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's just, oh, I'll start knitting and then no longer have anxiety. I know it doesn't work like that. But try to find things that sort of get yourself more involved in some other direction, I think is useful. And I feel like I'm just completely out of ideas today. It's been a very, very long, hectic day, I will admit. I would also try to find people, close peers or family who you can sort of talk out your anxiety. Sometimes it's as simple as talking about the things that scare you to sort of see where they are less likely to happen, or sometimes it feels a little bit silly afterwards, even though that was such a terrorizing thought to you. When you sort of talk about it with someone, sometimes it sort of puts it more into perspective, and I'm not saying this is necessarily going to be the case for you, but it's sometimes that does work. So try to talk to somebody about it. Certainly if you know someone that deals with anxiety in particular, they may be able to give you sort of better tips, because I don't really have all of the answers in this case, darling. I'm really, really sorry. I just sort of drink and then give myself a physical activity to sort of focus on until I'm so tired I just fall right asleep and don't even have any energy to worry about anything. And it's a coping mechanism. Is it the most healthy? But probably not the most healthy, but it is much healthier than staying awake all night worrying about something, right? So, um, what was the original question? I don't even know anymore, darling, but I hope that at least something that I said is useful for you. And if you ever just want to talk about it, or if any of you out there want to talk more about nuclear energy, then by all means, I have some information and I know people I can set you up with to talk about sort of getting rid of nuclear energy and also nuclear proliferation. If you're not quite sure about that, I would go on Wikipedia or Google or something and look at it because it's actually quite an interesting thing. Um, so yes, anyhow, darlings, have a wonderful evening. I wish you all a anxiety-free and peaceful sleep when you get to it, and otherwise just a wonderful day. So, cheers and ta-ta.